This moment, I'd like to turn it over to Diane Wittenberg, who will introduce the session for all of you in attendance. Diane?
Thanks, Greg. Well, good morning, everyone. We'll try to continue with our session with no buzzkill from all the energy this morning. So I'm Diane Wittenberg. Some of you remember me. I was head of the California Climate Action Registry and then the Climate Registry, and we sort of birthed the Climate Action Reserve, and it's something to be very proud of. Now I head up the California State Parks Commission. But the reason I'm here, I haven't been here for a few years, is that my co-author and I, Mike Peavy, who was head of the Public Utilities Commission here in California for 12 years, have just finished a book. And thanks be to our current president, who refers to climate change as just the weather, it's a very relevant book. It's called California Goes Green, A Path to Climate Leadership. So I wanted to moderate with the gentleman here to my left on their panel, because as we traced California's rise to climate leadership, which was not certainly planned from the very beginning, certain premises and principles of leadership came up that I want to test with these gentlemen. Although many things can be say to have started California's path, I was interested to see that in the 50s, Los Angeles banned incineration because of all the great clouds of black garbage and said they were going to institute trash pickup. And there were many people who protested that with signs, I'm going to keep my incinerator. And then they took their incinerators and they did things to them, like turned them into little go-karts or made them into backyard barbecues. So the sort of progress of California's environmental movement has always had its little steps forward and back and creative elements to it. But really what happened was we had to fight the criteria of pollutants to save our air. We made very strong agencies that would carry out those the needs that we had. The politicians supported that. The people supported that. One important thing was the California Energy Commission that's made energy efficiency so important. You know, we have appliance standards for everything, wine coolers, swimming pool pumps, electric vehicles. And I think that was one of our main global leadership moves in the 70s, was this big effort on energy efficiency. And then Mike and I kind of traced that after the energy crisis, that's when renewable energy really came into its own. And now our governor is making a 50% renewable by 2030 goal, which is very aggressive, and we can probably make it. And of course, in the headlights now are the biggest sectors, transportation, and then the tool, cap and trade. So we'll stay tuned. I was a little disappointed the governor didn't talk a little bit more about cap and trade, but clearly he said he's going to fight for passing it. What? Can you tell us more? Good.
Yeah, I can tell you more.
All right.
The Vanna White of cap and trade.
So let me introduce the gentleman to my left. Over there, Vanna.
Yeah.
First he wanted to fight in a cage, now he's Vanna White. Is Secretary Matt Rodriguez, the head of the California EPA. He's been head of California EPA since 2011. He sits in the governor's cabinet and gives him his environmental advice. And he also was the assistant district attorney when Jerry Brown was the attorney general. So he trusts him very much. And my immediate left is Minister Glenn Murray, who's an MP in the province of Ontario, who's very much a climate change leader, and he's the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. When I read about him, I knew that he'd had a lifetime of very active work in sustainable development, but then Minister McKenna also said he's also a climate nerd. I don't know if you were in the room for that, but we know that about you as well. So thank you both for being here. kind of a nerd kind of place. And let me ask you my first question, and I'll start with you, Minister, because you're from out of town. All this talk about subnational leadership and how it's coming to the fore in our case because we must, as Mr. Steyer said, but always because we've wanted to and could and have done it. And I think both California and Ontario sort of illustrate that. So would you speak to that subnational leadership and how you influence others, where you've influenced others, how you're exercising your leadership? Just tell us all about it.
I think there's incredible synergies between California and Ontario politically. Historically, California by far the largest economy, jurisdiction largest economy in California, Ontario the same. You started with garbage collection. Ontario has always had a really unique role in the world. In the 1980s, we introduced blue blocks recycling. In the late 70s, for the first time, that came out of Ontario. An environment minister named Jim Bradley, who still sits in the legislature, introduced that, and that was the first really big revolution, and that's continued to last year when we passed, I think, one of the first circular economy bills, which requires, it's another market mechanism like cap and trade called extended producer responsibility. So now in Ontario, anybody who makes or sells a good in Ontario is responsible for the end life of that project. So you now have Walmart and Procter & Gamble negotiating with municipalities. They now have to take over all the costs of all the recycling and waste reduction. And we think about 50% of our GHGs are from materials-based solutions. So we actually see that bill, that legislation, as one of the two major initiatives. The other one, obviously, is the cap and trade bill and legislation. But that was really the third step for us. We started over a decade ago in 2003 when our first premier and the Liberal government came to power, replacing the Conservatives. It was on a commitment of closing coal plants, which was about 1/3 of our emissions. So the first big wave was to decarbonize our electricity system. We closed all our coal plants. The second was really the Green Energy Act, where we introduced a German-style feed-in tariff system and shifted to renewables and a very aggressive pricing system around that, and then really carbon pricing with our friends in California. And I want to give a shout out to David Hurtel and then my friends in Quebec who have been our linked partners politically and environmentally. That was really the third stage, and I think where Matt and I have been for the last few years is really now trying to solidify that foundation and then try to build a North American carbon market and pricing system and seize the economic opportunities that the governor was talking about. And we really see this, I've often said, are probably arguably our most important political relationships in the world for Ontario are Quebec and California. We see that huge percentage of the North American economy, as Mr. Steyer said, being able to set standards because we're big enough together to do anything. No matter what national administrations may have done or do, there's nothing really stopping us once we get together. This binational coalition is really unstoppable, I think.
Okay.
Why subnationals? What's the importance of subnationals? I think that many people in the public knew about this international dialogue about climate change, but it remained a rather abstract concept. The climate changes from day to day. There are emissions in the air, but could people on a daily basis see those emissions? It was a difficult concept, I think, for people to understand, and I think that it was difficult to get people to buy into what was going on in the UN negotiations. I think the role that subnationals play in all of this is that the subnational level, at the state, the provincial, the regional, the local level with local governments, we're the ones who have been seeing climate change and the effects of climate change. So we've seen that changes in weather pattern that changes the growing seasons in agriculture. We're the ones who are actually seeing that there is sea level rise already. We're seeing changes in the way that, and in the health of our forests. And so we've been adopting programs to deal with the effects of climate change. And so for us, it's a very real, tangible issue. And we have a good story to tell about how we've been dealing with that tangible issue. When we did talk at the UN, when we were in Paris, the story was, look, we are adopting programs at the regional and the local level that are reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Here are the programs that we've been implementing in California, in Germany, in Canada, in the UK, in South America, in Asia. And it's an important story because not only are we reducing emissions, but there's this concern about that will affect your economy or undermine your economy. No, the economies are doing well. California's economy is doing well. You want to get out ahead of these new technologies. You want to be part of that wave of new technologies that are really setting a path for what our societies will look like in the future. And so there's a good story about we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We're doing so at a time when that's helping our economies. And additionally, we're showing that government entities, and it may appear that we're very different government entities and we have different issues, but we're showing that government entities from around the world can join together, identify common objectives, and then work together to achieve those objectives. And so we have a wonderful working relationship with Quebec. People say, well, California, Quebec, very different. No, the sources of our emissions are actually very, very similar. Transportation is a big part of the emissions problem in California, big part of the emissions problem in Quebec. We have many things that we can discuss in terms of our programs. They're interested in renewable energy. We're interested in renewable energy. We have the same dialogue going on with Ontario. And then we have those same discussions with cities and provinces in China and also with Germany. So it's a good story about how different governments can come together. I should say that just today we're in a position to announce that Mexico and Canada have both agreed that they will support the Under 2 coalition and will be signing on to support the coalition because we have a good story to tell. We need to continue to go out and tell that story because it shows how we have been working to deal with climate change. And so that informs the dialogue that will go on at the international level.
So how similar do you think your publics are? There was a lot of talk today about the economy being tied to jobs, being tied to clean energy, and we didn't talk about public health, but citizens usually feel that if their societies are healthy, they can be more productive. How do you engender the citizens in each of these jurisdictions to really support leadership in climate change?
You want to go first, or you're
Sure.
okay? I'll just look. California is climate. You know, it's one of 5 Mediterranean climates in the world. I know Cynthia Corey's here for representing agriculture, and agriculture is a big part of California, and it's very reliant on us maintaining a healthy climate for agriculture. Recreation, tourism, a big part of California. It's you know, our coastline, our mountains, our deserts are a big part of why we come to California. And so I think that's why Californians are appreciative of an effort to maintain our natural resources. They understand how those resources have helped to build the California economy. They're an important part of the California economy. And so what we need to continue to do is make that connection. I don't think it's all that hard because Californians appreciate the environment that we've got here. That's why we've got our coastal programs. That's why we've got programs to clean up the air. That's why there's support for programs to conserve water. we understand that that's what makes California what it is. What we need to do, however, is also then continue to send out that message, but be very transparent and work with our communities to make sure that they understand the decisions that we're making and the basis for those decisions. They need to understand the science behind those decisions, and we need to continue to be credible. So it's a combination of, I think Californians already understand we have a good deal here. It's why we live here. It's why California is successful. We need to invest in preserving what makes California great, but we also have an obligation to explain our decisions and make sure that everybody understands why we're doing what we're doing and why we think there are benefits to the people. So that's what we try and get out and what we try to do.
Well, Minister Murray, are the citizens of Ontario driving you to the climate leadership, or is there more that needs to be done, would you say, on the flip side of explaining to them why it's so important? I mean, what drives you?
Well, I think you have to lead. I think we don't have a lot of leaders these days, Governor Brown being a notable exception. I just want to say two things that were said earlier in the open speeches that I thought were quite precise and to the point. One is Governor Brown said you should feel good about yourself. I want to radically agree with him. All of us are way too freaking comfortable. No, I'm very serious. Mm-hmm. We use 8 times as much energy as my grandparents did, 4 times as much energy as our parents did, and we having trouble reducing our emissions. I don't know. I'm going to guess a few of you lived through the last 50 years, since the 1950s, when everything went off the rails as far as incredible increases in per capita, and we all decided we couldn't live in 1,500 square feet houses anymore, and we had to have McMansions, mm-hmm. and we had to have 3 cars. Feeling good about that? I'm not. We've seen incredible social inequity because of greed, and so let's get off our butts. We're in public service here. We're not as, this is the equivalent to fight this is gearing up to a war. Politicians are very, very good at conditioning people to send their kids off to be killed. We've done that many, many times and continue to do that. That's the level of political leadership and resolve that's required, is getting us to condition ourselves to explore that discomfort, to understand the changes we have to make in our life. And they're hardly the kind of sacrifice that has been asked of previous generations. Ride your bicycle, please. I don't own a car. If I, as a cabinet minister, can survive without an automobile, I'm going to suggest that a large percentage of the population may be able to get down to 1 vehicle, or God forbid, an electric vehicle. Buy local food. Eat locally, eat a low-carbon diet, and think about how you're heating and cooling your home and using energy. I mean, in Ontario, after we closed our coal plants, 35% transportation, 25% buildings, and the carbon footprint. We also waste 40% of our food, which is just disgusting to me. We're going to lose a lot of food in agricultural productivity, and food waste now, if it was a nation, would be the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter after China and the United States. I mean, these are the kinds of things that leaders have to talk about. And the second thing that struck me in the conversations earlier was Mr. Steyer's comments about calling people out in the lies. I have never lived in a period of time as a politician where I have seen lying more frequent than truth-telling. And I don't know what your mother taught you, but I remember bars of soap that got put in my mouth. Because, and think about that. That wasn't uncommon in my generation. And why would someone stick a bar of soap? I mean, we probably get started with child abuse today, but that was how dramatic in my family telling the truth was. The Arctic spiked 50 degrees Fahrenheit, translated into American, 3 times in January. And I was in an office building in downtown Toronto going to speak to a group of bankers, and what was flashing on the TV screen in this tower was the fact that there were 3 enormous cracks, caverns that have opened up in Greenland, saying that a large part of the Greenland ice sheet may sink into the ocean. So it's not 400 parts per million equals 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's the fact that the jet stream in Canada is 20% slower than it used to and is now creating massive droughts. It is now the Marindontal current in the north is now slowing down. The polar vortex is destabilizing, and we're facing drought events and fires we've never seen before. And that boreal forest, which covers 54% of Canada, actually absorbs 26 times global human emissions. So if you think about that, all of our emissions, we've already done so much damage to our forests that only of the 5 billion hectares of forest on the planet, only 10% still have intact tree cover. If we can't restore those ecosystems, they make everything in the Paris Agreement look like a drop in the bucket compared to the enormity of the problem. So we've now pushed it so far that we're going to have to move our climate action plans beyond anthropogenic into ecological restoration. Because if you lose 5% of the carbon sink ability of that boreal forest that covers half of my country, this planet probably is not that livable for most of us. That's more consequential than the totality of human emissions on the planet that we're trying to do. So it's time to wake up and get a lot more serious about it. And people on the political right and left who understand that, because conservation, remember, cap and trade was a Republican idea. You know, I remember Governor Schwarzenegger coming up with our former premier, standing on the front line in Queen Park and talking about what a great idea this is. That was less than a decade ago. That was barely a decade ago. So I mean, I think this shift is, stop talking about followership, because you really don't have a right to as a leader until you're providing leadership. So don't tell me that they're not there yet if you're not taking them there. And if you're going to stand by and let the lies flow, then you're responsible. And as I said, everyone should go out and read Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism to understand how we get into problems. And I'm not referring just to a certain German dictator, but I'm talking about the shift from Emile Zola and the Dreyfus Affair to how we lost civil society and lost our democracies, because I think we're very much at risk of doing that if we continue to have a tolerance for ignorance and lying and poverty that we have today.
And I'll just add on. I'll just add on to say that Minister McKenna may have been right, but Minister Murray makes environmental nerdism pretty cool, I think.
But following on to that, Secretary Rodriguez, Minister Murray said some hard things, and some of them reflect what our governor has talked about in the past and referred to about shorthand, small is beautiful. Mm-hmm. And do you think Californians are ready for that kind of pullback as part of how you address climate change, as you want less, do with less?
Oh, you look at what's going on in California cities today. You look at the way people are starting to change their lifestyle. I think that there's a vision for what California looks like. And I think that's an important part of our climate program. I mean, we were talking about sustainable communities in California. The era of ever-increasing suburbs getting further and further out, and people have to commute longer and longer distances to get their jobs. I think we've realized that that's not a model we want to perpetuate. And so what you see is in Oakland, for example, what the governor started when he was the mayor of Oakland. He said, you know, we need more people in the city. We need to make it vibrant. We need 10,000 housing units in Oakland, and that will also make it easier for people to get to their jobs, and that will make it easier for us to promote public transit. And maybe that everybody, as Minister Murray suggested, doesn't need a car for every adult in the family. And so you're seeing those transitions going on. You're seeing a rebirth of California cities. I think you see what's going on here in the construction that's going on here. What we need to do is make sure that those programs reach all Californians, and that everybody gets to benefit from these changes that are going on in society, and that we make sure that zero-emission vehicles are really affordable to all segments of California society, and that as we're cleaning the air and we're reducing emissions, that all Californians, including the folks who live around the emitting facilities, are benefiting from cleaner air, and that they get to participate in what I think will be a technological revolution here in the state. So we need to reach out. We need to make sure that everybody gets to participate in this change. But we're seeing change on a daily basis, I think, and we'll continue to see that go ahead.
No, I just want to say, I don't think it's giving anything up. I don't feel that I have lesser life. I don't have to pay $300 a month for parking. I don't have to pay $3,000 or $4,000 for insurance. I don't have to spend 2 hours in traffic. I don't have to deal with dents and tire changes and where do you put the winter tire. I mean, having a bicycle, and not everyone can do that, or having an electric vehicle is a lot lower maintenance. But more than all of those things, the price that we're paying for this excessive use of energy that is pollution causing, especially when we have a choice of energy that isn't pollution causing, is the destruction of the very things that we value. Our mountains, our lakes, our rivers, our streams. Our oceans full with plastic and crap and garbage. Now, I started scuba diving, and I go to the most beautiful places, and what do I see? I see the residuals of Coca-Cola bottles and K-cups and stuff rotting up on the beach. You know, that someone's need to have a coffee convenient, especially when you can have a compostable coffee cup right now that turns to soil, thanks to some of the good farmers and agricultural geniuses in my province who figure these things out, is the very reason people come to California isn't for the freeway experience. It's for the beauty of nature. And if droughts, if you've got, how many trees are dead now?
Oh. Yeah, it's
a lot.
It's in excess of 60 million. And
the Trump administration just eliminated all funding for Great Lakes protection. Well, Phragmites is destroying fragrant ecosystems. Asian carp is just a couple of kilometers out of the Detroit River. Pesticides, neurotoxic systemic pesticides, are killing off both terrestrial invertebrates like bees and also water invertebrates. We have levels of toxicity in those lakes at a time when we need a commitment, and climate change is complicating all of that, including acidification of the smaller lakes, destroying many of the microorganisms which the fish population is. And we have enough mercury, now 95% of the mercury now that is making much of our fish and our wildlife unedible comes from the United States and from China. And even the hook and bullet clubs in the US, I think, want to protect the great American fish from mercury so that it can be edible and healthy. Like, it seems to me that there is a broad urban-rural consensus that human beings haven't figured out how to make things as useful or as beautiful as Mother Nature can. There's no more efficient carbon-eating machine than a tree and a forest, which are now in massive degradation. The warming of our forests has now allowed beetles to wipe them out. The lodgepole pine forest in British Columbia, which is the most biodense forest, is now 80% dead and has gone from being a carbon sink to being a carbon source. But we've lost the beauty of one of the most beautiful forests. How many rivers do you have to lose? How many forests? How many egos? All amphibians are dying at 40,000 times the background rate. We're in an extinction where we're losing all the things that inspire us about life and make our countries beautiful, our rivers and our lakes and all of that. That's what's in the balance from not fighting pollution and not fighting climate change. So take those things away. Have another 5 years of severe drought in Syria or California and see what's taken away from you. Lose your wetlands, lose the biodiversity, lose that. What better legacy do we have to our children? And if that is actually a reduction, that is losing, that is pulling back. Keeping nature as part of the life, part of our lives, the places we want to go, the things that we inspire us, our souls, our character, the beauty and complexity of these interrelationships that we have. If we think that we're making progress right now by pulling back from nature, by losing the very elements of the planet that makes our lives worth living and makes and inspires us, then I actually think we're really on the wrong track. I think we're actually losing, and I think we're asking people to give up stuff we have no right to ask them for. And asking them to drive an electric vehicle isn't asking them to give anything up. It's actually saving them, saving many things that we need for them and our children that we just can't have if we do these other things that we keep doing right now.
So let's turn for a minute to some of the tools that we need as government officials, and cap and trade being the in the limelight right now. The governor mentioned in California that he's going to make a big effort to get cap and trade extended from 2020 to 2030, and that's going to need a bipartisan vote in the legislature. So Secretary Rodriguez, can you talk a little bit about that effort, other ways that we can extend cap and trade? What if it isn't extended? Looking at it from a policy tool point of view and its viability.
A couple things to note. Cap and trade is just one of a suite of programs, obviously, that we have in California. And one of the things we talk about is, there are a variety of ways to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. And so cap and trade is an important part of the overall program, but renewable energy is important. Promoting zero emission vehicles is important. Energy efficiency is important. Changing the carbon content of the fuels is important. So, we're pursuing all those things. Cap and trade, however, has been the centerpiece, and we continue to see that as the way that we get most of our greenhouse gas emissions in the state. It provides flexibility to businesses while at the same time guaranteeing that we have reductions in emissions over time. Clearly, there's no question about our ability to continue the cap and trade program through 2020, and we're working with Ontario right now to include them in our linked program that we have with the province of Quebec. And those programs and the cap and trade program is, I think we've spent about $3.7 billion that we've obtained through the cap and trade program in the state of California. A large portion of that has gone to the communities around the sources of emissions. So we've seen a number of benefits coming out of the program. Our position, frankly, is that we do have the ability to continue the program beyond 2020. We've got to maintain, obviously it wouldn't make much sense to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and then not do something to maintain those reductions. But we know that there is a perception out there that further action is needed by the legislature in order to continue the program. So to deal with that perception that there's some question about the program, we are working with the legislature right now. And we're at the same time talking about the benefits of a program that is providing billions of dollars that we can reinvest in our communities. So we're having that discussion with the legislature right now. And I'm very optimistic about that dialogue and working with the legislature, because I think there is a recognition that California is a leader on climate issues, that cap and trade is a central part of the program, that the auction process has worked very successfully. There have been some auctions where we haven't sold all the allowances clearly, but that's because it's a market and uncertainty affects markets from time to time. But we think that it is a well-designed market. We think that Ontario has done a very nice job designing a program that will fit very nicely within with the California program. So we continue to work together to make the emissions trading program successful, and we think that it's a good model, and there's every reason then to continue that program. So it's a good story, and we just need to get that story out, let people see it. And make sure that we address some of the other concerns that are about emissions. We need to make sure that all Californians think and understand that they're benefiting from these programs. So we need to get that message out too. And certainly we're very mindful of the fact that if you live in a community around an emitter, you want to know that those emissions are going to be reduced over time. And so we're looking at that. Are there other things that we can do in addition to cap and trade to regulate and reduce emissions from some of these large emission sources? But as I said, I feel positive about our ability to go ahead and continue to pursue this program, and we'll keep telling that story at forums like this.
So, Minister Murray, how will the Ontario program fit in with this and make it all better, as you were saying, a stronger group?
Well, I want to thank Matt and our friends in California and Quebec. Well, we had our first market. It was 100% sold out. We had a very high participation rate, massive participation. So we have 15 more auctions between now and 2020. we think linking with Quebec and Ontario is very important because California is such a large economy, and with Ontario and Quebec, we have a binational coalition, which I think will eventually force a market into the North American as the reality, because I think you're going to start getting into the issues of those jurisdictions that don't have a cap and trade price or a carbon price are going to have to resolve that. I mean, part of the reason the federal government acted is you can't have half the country's economy or most of the country's economy with a price, and then what you do with natural gas that comes from Saskatchewan that doesn't have a price on it. So once the majority of the North American economy or a significant enough part of it. Also, once you lock it up, we had a former Supreme Court justice who did all our legal work. It's pretty hard to undo it. Do you know what I mean? And I'm really in the business. I didn't get elected and then go through all the problem getting elected, then getting appointed to cabinet, to finally get a small window to do something, to do it in a way that someone can undo it after. I want to give President Obama some credit for designing some things that are hard to undo, thank God. But I think that's it. But I just want to get to the thing. Once this is done, it's time to get on with it. Like, you know, California, Quebec, and Ontario lead North American direct foreign investment. We attract more capital and new capital into our economies than all of the other states and provinces, number one. We've had 1 million jobs created in Ontario in the last, since the recession. 80% of the full-time, the majority above the median income. You know, we're doing this because the low-carbon economy is a better, stronger economy. It's higher levels of productivity, higher levels of innovation, and we're seeing massive reinvestment even in our petroleum facilities. Nova Corporation just put $250 million into the Corona facility to do cogen and to decarbonize, and they're putting another $150 million. Goldcorp is about to build the first electric mine in the world using electric vehicles, and it doesn't need all that ventilation equipment. They're going to dramatically drop the costs of that. St. Mary's Cement just bought Pond Biofuels, is using algae to decarbonize the cement production, but they're now a decarbonization company with a whole new suite. The startup is now one of their fastest growing sources of revenue. They're not just a cement company anymore. It's sort of like the information technology revolution. Remember, it was I guess there was a panel of technology IT geeks at one point up here. Then it changed everyone's business process. This carbon productivity, the shift to a low carbon economy, is transformational. I wouldn't want to be in one of the border states that is struggling, who's still going back to 8-track tapes, mullets, you know, coal plants, you know, and an Edsel. You know, like if that's your idea of the future, then I think you've mistaken reverse for third gear. So I'll sum up by saying this. So I want to get out of this, and like you look at environmental defense and the environmental movements, businesses. I want to get out of just talking to governments. I want to actually get out using extended producer responsibility, using cap and trade to make money and save the planet and keep the things alive that we want to keep alive. You know, let's stop talking about this. Can't you guys get excited about getting out and that? Let us worry about the instruments. You go make money, save the planet. Jeez.
Well, that was a very eloquent comment on subnational leadership. As our host state, I'd like you to close it, Secretary Rodriguez,
Thank you, my friend.
with a handshake, and also a few words on keeping American climate leadership strong at the subnational league.
Well, it was an important message. We went to Marrakesh right after the election, and so the question was, you know, what's going to happen in the United States? And, you know, my message was, one, we're not changing anything we're doing in California. Two, we're more committed than ever to making sure these programs work. And we think that action speaks much louder than words, particularly when those actions are supported by science. And if you look at what we're doing in California, if you look at the changes in technology, if you look at the investment that California is attracting, if you look at the success of our programs in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, if you look at the science behind what we're doing, then you can see that we're on a trajectory that elections aren't going to change. We're going to continue to go ahead. We're going to continue to do what we need to do in order to work with the international community to address climate change. And I can't be nearly as eloquent as Minister Murray, but you know, we've got a mission, we've got a goal, we've got an objective here, and we can't back off now, and we're not going to because you know, as I look at the pictures of my grandson, I've got to preserve the world for him. So that's what we're going to continue to do.
Thank you very much. Give a hand for our panel. Thanks.